February might be the shortest month, but will it be the fewest amount of books I read this year? Let's check it out in my February reading wrap up. Real quick, if you guys want a little summary or taste of everything I read in February, I actually have a short for every single book I read, and you can check that out in my February Shorts reading vlog playlist here. Let me know if you like them or don't like them in those comments down below. It just gives me kind of like an idea of where I should be putting my energy and attention moving forward on the channel. An Alpha Claim by E. Bowser. It's kind of a shame because E. Bowser has so many different kinds of like fantasy and science fiction style stories that it would have been great if I just ate this story up and couldn't put it down. Honestly, it was not for me. I didn't like how the characters were talking to each other. I didn't like the level of repetition, and the writing style and prose in general was not my cup of tea. And like from my perspective, there were a bunch of things that made me think this was generally poor writing and not specifically a situation of taste or style preference. If I were rating this story, it would probably be like 1.5 or 2 stars, but really I only got 8% through. Can't even say definitively what this story is about. The Black Girl Magic Literary Magazine, issue number 3. This is a collection of short stories, and I just averaged out the ratings to come to a little over 3 stars. If you want details on each individual short story, I have February reading vlog shorts on each one that you can find in the playlist here. The Truth is in the Ashes by Melody Lynch. This is a urban fantasy sort of detective mystery werewolf shifter story. Our protagonist is a human with the magical abilities to speak to dead humans, which gets her working with Supernatural Crimes Unit by day. And at night, she works as a stripper in a local club. When a terrorist attack happens to a werewolf compound, the werewolf alpha sort of like calls her in specifically to work with him to help solve the crime. There is like a love triangle going on between the alpha werewolf, our female lead protagonist, and there's some implications that the head vampire dude is going to be the triangle unit going on there. The alpha wolf kind of claims that she is his mate. He sure as heck doesn't treat her like she's that important. So I was not a big fan of him as a love interest. Like, I got that she wanted to have like some casual intimacy with him, but I didn't understand why she was even sort of kind of gunning for a relationship. And I found the reason that she ends things hardcore at the end of the book to be really relatable and understandable. Meanwhile, I found the vampire head to be kind of like fun and flirty. So I'm really looking forward to the second book in the series, which I think just released last week. I loved our female protagonist lead. She's very plucky. She knows how to fight. She knows how to sneak into places and sneak out of places. She goes where the clues lead, and she doesn't have like any preconceived notions about who could do what. So werewolves were like more traditional monster werewolves and like romance shifters. They don't fully transform into wolves. They like have like a half-man beast form and then like a human form, which was interesting. It's been a long time since I've seen that, so that sort of took me in from the start. The reason this is sitting at 3 stars instead of potentially higher on the list is I felt like they used some nuclear options here that they didn't have to. Without spoilers, I can't go too much into it, but basically there is some graphic violence and some extremeness in the story that wasn't necessary, and I didn't feel like effectively paid off. This is too short a story to have so many characters in it. Waited for the next story to introduce some of these people, or we could have combined them if they don't need to all be separate. Like the second command of the werewolf and her have like a real buddy-buddy relationship that sort of comes out of nowhere for no reason. It makes that character feel really flat and feel like they don't have anywhere to grow, and it also makes them feel like they're there just for some witty banter. Next is going to be The Black Pages by Nettie Okafor. This is also part of the Black Stars collection, and I have a more in-depth review about it here, but basically it's sitting at 3 stars instead of 4 or 5 stars like the rest of the collection because there's a lot going on that I just felt like was abrupt and choppy and like I didn't fully understand. And I had so so many reads that were like so good and like above average for me. Felt odd putting something that I didn't personally like so much higher than some things that I had a really good time with, and that's why it's sitting here at 3 stars. Elven Wings by Brittany Chanel. This is a whole series, and I guess I could have rated each one of the books individually. I got it from Kindle Unlimited and read it as a full series all in one book, and that way I'm able to cover the full story arc here instead of just like little bits here and there. Overall, I thought it was a fine story. I read Brittany Chanel before and I loved her The Fae and the Fallen, but I don't think that this one executes as well. I didn't fully understand the concept of this story, and you're not really supposed to because there's a reveal at the very last book, so I'm not gonna spoil it, but it makes the whole story like really sad and macabre. So I didn't particularly care for that part of it. It also felt like it was written for young adults or like for juvenile readers. If that's the case, at the end of this reveal sends messaging that makes me a little bit uncomfortable recommending this to teens and young adults. Some of the language and some of the emotional beats I just think aren't quite right for an adult reader. And that could be me. Because of that, it's sitting at 3 stars. Parts of it were fine. I think the story was a lot shorter than The Fae and the Fallen, even though it was broken up into more books. And there were a lot more characters that we were following around. I don't think that we got the development or the depth that we really needed from most of these characters to make them work. Like, our main protagonist and our love interest are decently fully fleshed out, rounded characters. Their motivations pretty much make sense, and you are rooting for them and more or less want to follow them. I don't know that I necessarily bought their chemistry, the things that I'd want in a relationship, they're just not doing. In the beginning of the first book, we get this look at the female best friend, and I was excited for her. I was getting ready for like some female friendship bonding moments. And then she just turns and never comes back to that center. Like, from then on, she's just suspicious. It's very confusing. It's a very abrupt turn. And where the love interest went from not trusting to trusting, like his turn from those two made sense because his distrust was like sort of a little bit grudging and angry. And as he works his way through those emotions, he comes back to center to full trust and care about this character. So like, you can buy his quick turn and his loyalty to his change of mind, but I just don't buy her immediate trust and loyalty and wanting to bond and this like transformation of distrust and never really coming back around to that same loyalty or camaraderie. We don't get like any bonding moments, much like the main character here who is suffering from amnesia and she has hundreds of years together with these people she doesn't remember. These characters don't do anything to build new memories. That's hard for me. We as the readers are continually being told that these people are very close and a group of friends, and we never see that happen on page. There's this one-winged Valkyrie. The idea of having a Valkyrie who's lost one of her wings in battle and how she deals with that is really interesting, but what's done with her in this series is not interesting, and her own book is super disappointing. We really never get to know her that well, and she's supposed to be like a very tragic beat in the story. I never felt that way because we just don't know her. And it kind of feels like most of the other Valkyries feel that way too, because they don't seem to be mourning her or her disappearance that much either. We also have one Valkyrie who, instead of getting wings, like turns into a hawk. And in a lot of ways, he was the most interesting of the Valkyries, but we also just don't spend enough time with him. The de facto leader of the Valkyries, because he is also just like a confusing butt. And his girlfriend slash wife, Lily. Yeah, I found these characters pretty unrelatable. I found their story beats kind of awkward and all over the place. The story as a whole gets passed, it gets 3 stars, but there's nothing in it for me to personally recommend this specific story. I think if you want to read Brittany Chanel, you should stick with The Fae and the Fallen. I don't think you should come over this Elven Wings Valkyrie series. I will give it like a fun little call out. She has a moment where the Valkyrie is realizing she's a bookworm, and she's looking at all the fantasy and science fiction books she reads, and in there, Brittany Chanel includes her own stories and points out that The Fae and the Fallen is that Valkyrie's favorite story because it's all well-worn, and she gets to read it for the first time again. And I was like, same girl. I wish I could read Fae and the Fallen again for the first time too. A Queen's Pride by D. Jones. So this story is sitting at a 3.5 star, and I'm rounding up to 4. A lion shifter action adventure story that is taking place on an island off the coast of Africa. It's been a long time since I have read something that wasn't specifically shifter romance, and while there is a relationship in this story, it's definitely not the main theme. I was really into the lion culture and the whole premise of there being a bunch of different cat shifter people and humans being an offshoot of cat shifters. I was also interested in what made the lion shifters different from all the other shifters, being like their pride focus, and having all these like loner type cat shifters out there in the world led to a stronger sense of pack and unity in lion shifters than I usually get to see in most werewolf shifters romances at this point in time. And since I'm here for the pack dynamic and the friendship and the working together kind of thing, right away this was going to be higher on the list. Some things that kind of held this story back. I think this was supposed to be a character-driven drama, but all the characters feel very like template to me. I just didn't get a sense of individual from them. Also, I almost put this book down as soon as I opened it because the prologue was god-awful boring, just the worst thing I've ever read in my life. Articles in a treaty and a suggested amendment. I have no idea why they decided to open with this. It's just such a slow start to something that's supposed to be more like action-y kind of thing. So if you're a reader, I recommend skipping the prologue. You really don't need all the minutia. And if you're an aspiring writer, I feel like it's very important to point out, number one, that most people don't read prologues or want to read prologues. Number two, please don't exposition dump right here in the beginning or anywhere in your story. It's so god-awful. And then number three, if you are for some reason going to do a prologue or do like a little bit of a slow start that kind of like helps the reader immerse in the world, don't make it so pacing-wise different than everything else in the story that like it's going to turn a reader off before they get to the faster paced thing that you're doing further in. And my last takeaway is that this story has like gratuitous like torture and gore in it. It doesn't like give a blow-by-blow description of all of the bad things characters are doing to each other, just sort of like sets you up like this terrible thing happened to them or that terrible thing happened to them. But it was enough where I was like, this feels really excessive. It was the sort of thing that I would see in like a revenge style story or like a fanficky kind of story. Revenge can be cathartic and it can be like a fun thing to read. It was missing some of that general hatred or like that core brooding element so that readers can really empathize and feel when the revenge portion happens. Our character who originally goes through the traumatic experience of being captured and tortured, she could have escaped like very easily and for some reason decided not to. I'm not trying to victim blame, but at the same time, it was a situation where like I stepped back from her as a character and this is a story and put myself in the author's shoes and I was like, well, why does the story go down this way? Does this character sit here specifically so she can do a revenge story in the back? And if so, maybe don't acknowledge that she can get away. This is book 1 in a series, and because the characters are not very well drawn out, I'm not actually interested in reading more from the series, even though I enjoyed this book. Next is going to be My Alien Threshers by Nikki Clark. This is a polyamorous alien romance story. I thought there was like a good burn on the romantic tension going on and the slow relationship building. The steamy scenes themselves were like acceptable, but the journey to get there was like a great tension and payoff scenario for me. The brother bond between the two male leads was really interesting and unique and something that I kind of enjoyed in general. And I loved that food played such a strong role in courting and in relationship building within this culture. I felt like the food descriptions were really good and made me want to try some of these unique alien dishes. It pulled from things in our world, but not so much so that I felt like it was othering. I could be wrong, and these people could be like one-for-one Blue Navi and very problematic, but I felt like it took a couple elements here and a couple elements there and made up a couple things that were unique so that it really felt like their own thing. I also like that there's just enough characterization in the female lead to give her her own like personality and not be a blank slate for the reader. I prefer stories where the characters are characters. They're not just like vehicles for me to self-insert. She had her own authentic reactions that seemed to make sense and didn't always one for one feel like they were happening because the plot had to keep going. A couple of things that were holding it back for me is like the lead protagonist just suddenly in the back third doesn't want to return to Earth, and she never really like gets into why, especially where she is a famous singer and she's just broken out and is starting her tour, and this is hypothetically something that she's worked really hard for, has no interest at all in returning to that. I think her family was mentioned a couple of times, and it was also strange to me that she doesn't want to go back to her family. And like another thing that was weird to me is they never really explain why capturing her and returning her to Earth was so important in the peace efforts between Earth and like the larger universe, which was like the original vehicle to get the story going. I suppose it's possible this was all just a ruse in general and her return to Earth is never that important. The way they re-emphasize it a couple times and the way they like keep insisting that Earth is on the cusp of joining the larger universe, that part of the world building just disappeared out of the back of the story, and I wish we'd gotten something or anything on that. The story could have been like a teeny tiny bit shorter. I feel like there were parts that were aimless or that was like one moment to the next without any larger plan on what the whole picture should look like. They're just like some soggy middle bits that I probably trimmed. And then like my last issue with this story is just the whole brothers are literally brothers and they're consistently in its steamy time scenarios. And it's not just because of this girl, this is like their culture or whatever, but I don't like that relative to not be involved in steamy scenes together. It's easy enough to just sort of like forget it or put it to the side and pretend that they just have like a psychic bond for reasons not having to do with them being related. But it is something that you actively have to do because otherwise the story gets real awkward real fast. Next is The Visit by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. This is also part of the Black Stars collection, and I've gone for a long time about this story in that video here. But briefly, I think the writing on this is excellent. I really liked the characters, and I definitely want to read something else by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie that's more character-driven and less speculative element in the future. Next is going to be 2043, A Merman I Should Turn to Be by Nisi Shao. This is another one in the Black Stars collection, and I talk about it a lot in the Black Stars. From start to finish, first talking about the tech, why the tech exists, why it's being used this way, then going into the personal with this specific group and their experience, and leading out into what the future of this world might be. All of that is just woven really well together. Next is going to be These Alien Skies by C.T. Ruziwi. This is another book in the Black Stars collection, and one I discussed in detail in a past video. The personal character interaction and character interplay here is really good. Some of the little details that are woven in about different African cultures and the African dysphoria, what that looks like in space, all of that is really interesting and is giving like a lot of texture and detail that I personally hadn't gotten in other science fiction style stories before and found really refreshing and unique. Next is going to be Clap Back by Nalo Hopkinson, also in the Black Stars collection. Something I don't talk about in that previous video is how much I really liked the Forgiveness Quilt Project, the two different ways people interpret it. There's like media star, fashionista, write it down to forgive and forget kind of thing is a common mistake I feel like people make about forgiveness. Forgiveness equates a clean slate or forgetting. The main Black character in this story does call out. It's not a forgive and forget message. It's like a forgive and call out kind of situation on the forgiveness level. Like they're actively saying what someone has done wrong, how they've hurt them, and then even though they're saying they forgive them, they're forcing this to be something spoken publicly. And last is going to be Bacchanalia by Veronica G. Henry. This is another like 3.75 stars. I'm rounding into 4 stars. I love a good carnival circus kind of story. This is a little bit of an American historical piece. It's not set in present day, but I loved how like ordinary and the magical magical were kind of interwoven. The characters felt pretty well-rounded and real. There were things I could relate to about them and things I couldn't, but like me not relating didn't take away from those characters or make them feel unreal to me. It was just something that I had to sort of like agree to go with. I think specifically the main female protagonist we're following, like she wasn't always who I wanted her to be. And part of my reading experience with this story was accepting she was who she was and not who I just decided she should be. It suited her personality perfectly. There was no problem with it from a storytelling perspective. It was just a me issue. I would love to see this done in a movie. There are some elements to it that are like very visually interesting and I think would look great on a big screen. There were a couple of loose ends at the end of the story that I would have liked more of because it does end up being such a large ensemble cast. There were a couple characters that we just lost sight of that I was sad that I don't know what happened to them or where they went, or like I felt it should have worked out a slightly different way. I think if I had any critical feedback, it's that this story does have a love triangle and I don't understand why our main character is attracted to either one of these people. And there is like actually a third person that I think they should have got together with in the story or had some kind of romantic attraction to that just never ever comes up as a possibility. Riot Baby by Toshi Abuchi. Been on my TBR for a while and was brought up as one of like the community book reads for this year's Blackathon. And it was spoken so highly of, and I knew so many people were going to be reading it. I just couldn't hold back any longer and dove right into it. The summary in Riot Baby is technically accurate, but I don't think it does the story justice. It's so good and it's immersive right away. I feel like even though there are fantasy and science fiction elements in it, they're like subtle and done in this really expert weaving way that is so amazing. I am going to put out a full video review for Riot Baby. Right now, it is an early contender for Best Book of the Year. And there are a lot of themes and elements that I want to dive more deeply into, both on like my personal impressions on it, things that I think are worth discussing. I went in thinking it was going to be like a middle of the road sort of heaviness. I knew there were going to be like some dystopian elements and some violent elements in it, but I didn't realize how intense and how closely they were going to hit. So that is definitely something you'd want to look at in your reviews if you were more anxious. And Riot Baby is a story that specifically focuses on the Black experience when it comes with interacting with police, growing up, and the prison system. So I think that might be something, if you have a sensitivity to, you should be prepared for when you go into it. But it's so good. It has so many interesting and cutting points. It gets right to the heart of things, shows you all of the inhumanity in our own system, and asks us why we accept that kind of thing. I was just so in love with it. I don't think I can speak enough praises of it. Next is We Travel the Spaceways by Victor Lave. So besides having that short that reviews this, I also have the Black Stars collection where I go into detail in several of these books that are going to come up in the review. So I won't rehash everything about this book, but to me, this is a near perfect story. It took me through a full emotional arc of being like nervous and uncertain about what was going on and where the book was going, to feeling like triumphant at the end. And I feel like it explores so many different elements of modern life in like a quick little snapshot. All of it is really interesting and serving like a very unique and authentic experience that I just really loved and would recommend to anyone, especially as it's so short. I'm still reading Interview with a Vampire. I really only picked up a couple paragraphs this particular month. Also in the middle of reading The Perfect Waters by Leisha McCoy. I'm really enjoying it and I'm going to finish it. Also in the middle of reading Perfect Damage by Ivy Thorne. This was the book pick for the Erie Indies Book Club. I plan to finish reading it even though it's past February at this point. And I'm in the middle of reading Black Girl Magic, issue number 4, the horror edition. I love these horror stories. They're excellent, and you can see individual reviews of the ones I've read so far in those February vlogging shorts. But I just got short storied out. And a couple items on the TBR. So early into February, Heather over at Heo Booktubes put out a list of anticipated releases for February, which I'll link in the description below. And she got me into 2 different titles that I have sitting on my Kindle Unlimited and can't wait to dive into. First is going to be Fire and Brimstone by Stella Williams. This is a Phoenix shifter romance. I love dragon shifter stories, so I want all kinds of fantasy creatures who can shift to be in more stories, and I'm really excited to see what this particular one brings. Next is going to be Heart Haunt Havoc by Febuary Moon. Sorry, I really don't know how to pronounce that name, but this is going to be a non-binary, gothic, haunted romance sort of story, and it's got like the classic haunted house and gothic lit, and I just really want to read this modern take on gothic fiction. I'm very excited for this. I love all things gothic. I also have Captured Fate by Eva Chase. This is book 3 in the Shadowblood series. This is the newest series by Eva Chase that I'm loving and raving about. I read the first 2 books back in December, which is why you guys haven't gotten any information on them. It's definitely going to find a place in my heart right up there with her Bound to the Fae series. And if you like Why Choose monster romances, you should definitely pick this up. Even though the Shadowbloods are more related to Fae than monsters, they all have different attributes and like magic and forms and stuff that make them kind of monstery if you're looking for that like little bit of romance factor. Also, the Shadowblood series has a little bit of a bully romance element where the whole group grew up together and has feelings for each other. A tragedy strikes and they're separated, and when they're able to reunite, some misunderstandings lead to them treating each other poorly before they're able to reacquaint themselves and sort everything out. And of course, there's a larger adventure going on too, besides all this relationship stuff. Part of what I like about Eva Chase is even though she has a great focus on those relationships and those emotional beats, there's also some larger world stuff going on and some bigger concerns, which is part of why it takes the characters so long to get together. And that kind of like helps justify drawing things out and creating like more tension and great character moments. And that's all the reading I did in February, and a little sneak peek into a couple of the things that I'll be reading in March. Tell me what your favorite read in February was and why in those comments down below. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep reading. Bye!